And you're welcome back to Off the Ball Saturday here on News Talk. We're on air until 8 this evening, an extended show because we're showcasing commentary of Ulster against La Rochelle in the Heineken Champions Cup. So we've got the lowdown on books from Malachy Clerkin. What about those who like visual sport, though, over Christmas? Plenty of Premier League games, rugby action as well, but most of us love a good sports documentary. And who better to talk about sports documentaries than Ross Whitaker, who is behind Katie and Katie Taylor, A Grand Year, the Rachel Blackmore documentary, The Boys in Green on the Charlton Years, films on Shane Lowry, Barney Curley, Mark Pollock, and the late Anthony Foley, to name a few. Ross, you're very welcome to the studio.
Thanks, John. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to see you again. And let's just start maybe a bit of background and your own experience and what you're looking for when you do a sports documentary. And maybe when you sit down as a neutral observer, what are you looking for when you watch a sports documentary that would interest you?
It's such a funny time because the proliferation of sports documentaries is like nothing we've seen before.
Right.
There are so many of them that it's funny. I was talking to my wife before I came in here, and she's like, "Oh, you're going to mention the Neymar doc?" I was like, "Oh God, yeah, there's a documentary on Neymar as well." It's like,
which they'd have to update after what happened.
Yeah, and there's a Messi doc that came out about 18 months ago.
Okay.
So there's a whole other one of those going to be coming down the line. So there are so many, and which we're kind of spoiled, I think, at the moment for choice. You kind of go, "Oh, I watched the Neymar one, or I watched the Messi one, or God, Wayne Rooney has one, or whatever it might be." So there are so many, and I think that has made it really, really competitive in the world of sports documentaries. The bar has been set really, really high by things like Drive to Survive, Bad Sports, Untold, these series that are on various channels. I know Apple TV are looking at going into production on a couple of series. I'm sure Netflix are going to have more Drive to Survive. There's a Six Nations one coming. There's a tennis one that's been shot. There's a golf one that's already been shot. It's just everywhere. And the competition is huge, and people are looking for iconic people or teams. That's one massive thing. Access has always been a huge factor, and then storytelling and story. So is the story there? If you look at, say, the Ronaldo soccer documentary, the original Ronaldo, the best Ronaldo, it's brilliant. But really, it's brilliant because his story is brilliant. You know what I mean? And he's there to tell it. So you've got an iconic guy telling a great story, and then it's really well made. So these are kind of the factors that I suppose you're looking at, both when you go to make one and also when you go to watch one.
So they talk to rock stars about their influences. Were there sports documentaries that influenced you in terms of making them and also being motivated to do it?
Sure. I think the biggest one was When We Were Kings, which was kind of around 97 or so, and then around the same time we had A Year Till Sunday locally, you know what I mean? And that was just
Galway footballers.
Yeah, it was phenomenal, and so the combination of those two things was, wow, a sports documentary can be in the cinema and can move millions of people.
And win an Oscar,
an Oscar, absolutely. And the story behind that film is incredible. It took decades to make, and then the beauty of it sometimes is the audience doesn't know how long it took you to make it. They're just there on the day and they want to watch it, and it's new to them. A Year Till Sunday was phenomenal. So you kind of had a mixture of this big iconic sports documentary, but then also seeing there's someone doing this locally. It can be done if you get out there with your camera. You can make films yourself. So there's probably loads of other ones I'm forgetting, but those two stand out in my mind as kind of being the ones that kind of made me think, I'd like to do that.
It's like finding oil when you strike gold. A documentary like the Galway thing, it was 32 years since they won the All-Ireland, and they've all this footage now. They won it. So they really stumbled upon it in a way because they took the opportunity. But in terms of making one then, Ross, how long does it take? How much ends up at the cutting room floor? Do you have editorial control? Do you have a big team with you? The sausage making, as it were, into a documentary. Is there a set template?
Yeah, well, that's quite a lot of questions, John. No, there's a huge amount of factors, and it changes film or programme or documentary by documentary. But I just finished one last night about Ireland beating the All Blacks in the summer series earlier in the year, which was a phenomenal achievement. Only 3 other countries have ever done it. And we made that in about 6.5 weeks. Whereas, I've made another documentary I'm trying to finish off. It's not strictly a sports documentary. I think I started 10 years ago. So there's all sorts of different approaches, I suppose, and those approaches can lead to different timeframes. Speaking about the All Blacks one, a kind of old friend of mine and now colleague on this film, John Sherwin, he does a lot of filming with the RFU, and he was down there filming behind the scenes.
He had the footage.
So the footage is there, dressing rooms and training sessions and everything. And then, in the middle of the summer last year, I was like, oh God, I haven't had a great year so far. What am I going to do for the rest of the year? And I saw he'd put some footage up on social media, and I rang him and said, "Are you thinking about doing anything with that footage? You know, that's actually a great story." And he said, "I was thinking about it, yeah." So we decided to team up, and you know, the RFU, you know, happily got on board, thankfully, and got behind it. And then RTE said they would do it too. So, but we had to scramble because it's in the Christmas schedule, and you have to deliver it for today so they can do the subtitles and they can do the quality checks and all that kind of stuff.
And the editing as well. And then you've access all areas in terms of the players, or?
Well, yeah, basically the RFU provided the players, so we got to interview all the players in depth about the experience of it, and so we interviewed about 12 players in the end, because when you're in that time frame you can't have too much stuff. You know what I mean? Because you're literally going to have to go through every single word of it and figure out what to use. But yeah, interview the players, have all the behind the scenes footage, of course the matches through Sky and so on, and then other bits and pieces that you bring together to kind of try and tell that story, and it's a pretty enjoyable one.
Is it what, 90 minutes?
Oh, the one, this All Blacks one is an hour long for RTE.
An hour long.
It's on the 29th of December.
And how much would be there, say, in the raw materials, 6-7 hours, or?
Oh God, way more than that.
Right.
Like, yeah, I mean, between the interviews and the behind the scenes footage, you're probably talking between 20 and 30 hours, and that's not even a lot for a doc like that. You know, like a lot of people doing these kind of observational films, you know, like sports stories told over a long period of time, are hitting hundreds of hours.
Wow.
You know,
and then the box, do you go into the box and edit, or are you just direct? What role do you play, or do you get other people to do that?
I don't strictly edit it, but,
right.
you know, there'll always be an editor. In the case of this All Blacks one, we had to have two because we just had so little time, so they took half the documentary each.
Right.
But yeah, and I mean, one of the beauty of working with an editor is you're putting two heads together. You know what I mean? So, you know, if you and I are working together, you're going to have all sorts of ideas of your own, and you want to promote that, and you want to hear what you have to say. And you know, sometimes, like, there's a lovely little sequence in the All Blacks one where John Murphy, who some people will have heard his name around lots of documentaries and films in Ireland, he's a very successful editor, you know, said, "Oh, you know, have a look at this. I'm not really sure if it's working or not, but have a look at this." And it was just a sequence that he'd done. And I was like, "That's pretty cool, John. We'll stick with that." Yeah.
Sounds like making an album almost.
Yeah, it probably is. I mean, it's a real collaborative process, and I think the more you can be open to everyone else around you, the better it's going to be.
So you started off, was it the St. Saviour's?
Yeah, that was back in 2005. We started filming that. That was kind of my first thing, just pick up a camera and go. And we filmed in a boxing club for a year and a half with my friend and colleague at the time, Liam Nolan. The two of us did it together. It was just the two of us. And that was kind of the first foray into it. And Darren Sutherland, who went on to win an Olympic medal, would have been one of the boxers. And it was just... You see, in a funny way, though, I think those kind of documentaries you're going to see fewer and fewer of them. You know, it's a documentary about an unknown boxing club featuring unknown boxers. And even though there's actual real things, I'm always interested in this word stakes. And I think we spoke together a couple of years ago and I probably said a similar thing. But, you know, what are the stakes of each story? Because that's what you're looking for. That's where the drama of life is, you know, if there's nothing at stake, then there's no drama. But you know, I was watching a bit of Drive to Survive the other day, and you know, the guy says, you know, the stakes have never been higher than this. And you're thinking, these are a load of rich guys.
Lionel Messi on Sunday.
Yeah, well, the stakes, but those are all sporting stakes. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, if your wife is ill or your child is ill.
Some of the humanity here.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like the stakes are all kind of confected in a way, and that's why we love it. You know, it's because the stakes, they feel really high, but actually it's a drama that's unfolding in front of us. And in a way, that's the beauty of sports docs. But when we filmed Saviours, the stakes were really in people's lives. You know, one of the people we were following was at risk of being deported from the country. Another person that we're following, you know, he's kind of trying to be successful at boxing to improve the opportunities for him and his life, coming from a background in the inner city. And Darren was kind of pursuing his education but was struggling with things and so on. So, like, those are real stakes in real people's lives, you know, and in a funny way, as I watch more and more sports docs, I'm sometimes like, well, we're being given all these like high stakes things, but there are really high stakes within a sporting context, and we can really enjoy that. But, you know, we're seeing fewer and fewer of those kind of docs that are about real stakes in real people's lives.
How difficult or easy is it to get someone to open up to camera? Because obviously you want the gold, as it were. You want the emotion. You don't want it to be a wall of somebody really not just giving you anodyne quotes or something. So if you're talking to Katie Taylor or Rachel Blackmore or Shane Lowry, is there a process? Is it just a case of, look, we want your buy-in to that? How does that work?
Yeah, well, you hope to have that conversation at the very beginning.
Okay.
That's one thing I've learned is, if you sit down with Rachel or you sit down with Shane, first of all, you want to have that meeting where you go like, we're having a conversation now about levels of access. We're having a conversation now about what you're willing to speak about. And I suppose trying to explain to people that unless you show a bit of yourself, it just really won't be interesting to anyone. And there's probably no point for either them or for me as a filmmaker. So those are the kinds of things that you have in that conversation. I remember I had lunch with Katie at the very beginning, and honestly, I was actually I was quite starstruck because I even though I'd met her a few times, you're sitting down opposite someone, and she has an aura about her. So, but you're sitting down opposite someone and you're saying like, I want you to tell me about your life and to be willing to speak about it. And in her case, and in most people's cases, they kind of get it. They go like, well, if I'm going to, there's a reason why they're coming to the table too. If I'm going to participate in this and talk about my life, then, I understand that I need to kind of be real. I mean, that was Katie's thing. It should be real. And, Andy Farrell said the same thing a couple of weeks ago. When we were interviewing him, we showed him the film a couple of days ago, he said, well, I want it to be real, But there's also a difficulty for sports people, though, because in doing that, there's a lot of risks, risks in how they will be seen by the audience, but also risks in their professional environment. How will, in Rachel's case, trainers view them after this? How will the jockeys view them after this? In the Irish rugby team's case, it's like, you don't want to do anything that might upset relationships within the camp.
A year out from a World Cup?
Yeah, a year out from a World Cup. So, there are risks. And as a filmmaker, you have to be, I suppose, aware of what you're getting into and aware that these are real people with real lives as well.
So there'd be sometimes you go, actually, we're not going to put that on it. We're not going to put that out.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking, you're always trying to, look, my job is to push the volume up to 10 out of 10. And then sometimes you have to be realistic and compromise a little bit and pull back from that and say, well, is this thing that might seem really sensational or whatever it might be, is it actually part of the story, the one that we're telling? And if it is, then, we have to make that case to the person. And if it isn't, then maybe it's better for everyone if it's not in there.
From all your documentary making, was there one moment when you're behind the lens or when you're going, wow, about what's being said right now?
Yeah, probably loads, to be honest with you. That's the beauty of the job. I mean, I don't know if I'd recommend it as a job from a financial point of view, but from a job satisfaction point of view and getting to meet amazing people point of view, it's great, But I remember Katie, one of the early filming days that we did, I'd interviewed her and obviously the big kind of spectre over that part of her life, for want of better words. I'm not even sure I fully know what the word spectre means, but anyway, at the time, the controversy around her life was her relationship with her father. Back in 2016, which is when I would have been doing this interview, and I'd done an interview about how it felt to have moved to the States, and that was kind of our first kind of trip over to her and trying to get a sense of what her life was like there and getting the audience to understand that she was there on her own and that was completely different for her and all these kinds of things. And at the end of the interview, I said, I think that's all the questions. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? And she said, well, you haven't asked me any questions about my dad. And I said, oh, do you want to talk about that now? She said, I think we should just do it and talk about it now and then we feel like we've talked about it. And, I suppose it was a case of maybe in advance of the interview, she thought, well, she'd kind of maybe built herself up to it a little bit or whatever it might be. I don't know. I don't want to speak for her. But, at that point, she was completely open. And I found it very emotional to listen to her talk about the difficulties that she had in her life at the time. And, you kind of don't know what to do or where to go after something like that. It's just quite emotionally affecting.
Yeah, you just have to just let it happen and just observe and listen, I suppose. You're a listening filmmaker at the time.
That's it, and sometimes people want to just talk and that kind of thing, and then you kind of go back and watch it after and say to yourself, did that actually really happen? I need to watch this back, and see, and then then when you have that kind of buy-in from, look, Katie's an incredibly special person and very, very smart about so many things, but she really got what we were doing, and And to have that kind of, for her to be that open is just kind of an amazing gift to someone who's trying to make a film about you.
I watched the Boys in Green and the Barney Curley documentaries, really enjoyed them, and they're more historical stories of the past, and even for people who didn't know these characters and these people at the time, even if you didn't live through it if you're younger, they seemed really fun to watch. Or were they fun to make?
It's so fun to make. You know, both of those were incredibly fun to make, and for different reasons. I think the Boys in Green, you're kind of being given an era. You're like, here is 1987 to whatever, 1995, and it's probably one of the most interesting eras in recent Irish history. Like, Ireland is changing. We're suddenly being successful at things, you know, and it's all been captured on camera. You know, everyone's in love with the Irish football team, so there's cameras around them the whole time. There's all this footage, and it was also kind of a time of like a little bit of a mushrooming of interesting Irish music and stuff and things like that. You know what I mean? Like a lot of bands. There's kind of an era of like there's a lot of bands around and stuff like that. So you're playing with the music. You've got a lot of this great footage, and then they're great characters. You know, they're sporting characters from a different era. People like Tony Cascarino, and so on. You know, they just, their lives were more interesting in a way than the kind of athlete that comes through now, the academy system, and is given media training and so on. And that's not to say those people aren't interesting people or curious people, but you know, their life path to there is just very, very different. And so it was incredibly fun to make, incredibly entertaining. And you know, when it came out, it was, I think, the week before lockdown, and it was when everyone was just kind of going like, you know,
we were on nostalgia.
Yeah, it was like
vibe at the time.
It just seemed to be what people needed at that moment, and to make something and have that kind of response to it is also like really enjoyable and fun. And now in this, I don't know if we're almost in a post-Twitter era, but a few years ago, like, you know, a lovely thing is someone can kind of reach you and say like, oh, I really enjoyed that, or ask you a question about it and things like that. Like, that's one nice thing. You know, there's obviously a lot of negatives to social media, but you can kind of interact with people as they're watching it. Barney Curley, you know, is a story of a kind of really fascinating man who, amongst other interesting things in his life, pulled off this massive horse racing coup in the 70s. And we interviewed him at length, and very sadly, you know, he died quite soon after. So you felt like you had a lot of responsibility to him then as well, and to his family, lovely family. And obviously, you know, for them it was kind of quite a raw time, you know, so you're kind of interacting with them as well, and making sure that you're telling a story that captures him. You know, you're not trying to make it anything other than that, but it's like making a heist movie, you know, and that's how you're kind of leaning into that, and you're trying to enjoy that. And we did reconstructions, like we didn't have the budget like a, you know, Ocean's 11 budget, but we tried to reconstruct the horse race.
But it was a more a quiet track, and Bellewstown, and
that was the story. That he kind of found the you know, sometimes like things like this don't happen where you might expect, and it was in the quiet track of Bellewstown where no one would be watching that he managed to pull off the coup. And then Bellewstown were like really cooperative and really allowed us to film there and everything like that.
Great.
So you kind of, you know, people were on board, and that's just really enjoyable. And so, horses are amazing. So filming horses, great,
and as you did with Rachel as well. So Drive to Survive, Amazon's like All or Nothing, the whole sphere, as you said at the very start of this, Ross, has completely changed. Do you enjoy these documentaries? Are you plugged into them?
I am, yes, some. I mean, I find it hard at the moment, like, because, you know, during all those lockdown periods, we just watched series after series after series. And
Last Dance was on everybody's
I mean, The Last
evening
Dance was
list.
phenomenal. And he's a brilliant filmmaker. His Andre the Giant film, did you ever see that?
Didn't see that, no.
We're
having this conversation. We do this over Christmas.
Sure. Well, I'd say it's one of the best sports docs of the last 5 years, easily. He's done a Greg Norman doc now about Greg Norman sort of falling apart at Augusta back in the day in the US Masters golf against Nick Faldo. I haven't seen that one. I'm dying to see it. Sometimes you hear about these films, they happen over in America, and then you never quite understand when are they going to arrive here. But I'm sure it's available somewhere. But I mean, they're phenomenal ones. And I think what you see is certain ones, to me, stand out from the crowd, you know, and I like Drive to Survive, but it's almost a bit more like an entertainment show in a way, you know. And I mean, one of the ones that really struck me in the last year was Athlete A. I don't know if you saw that, about the kind of scandal around abuse in US gymnastics. It's a phenomenal series, like
harrowing.
Really, really brilliant. Harrowing, but just also really well made, you know, and Sometimes if you're doing documentaries that have a journalistic aspect to them, it's hard to not make it kind of a little bit like taking your medicine, you know what I mean? But it's really, really well made. Another series I watched in the last year, but it probably isn't quite from the last 12 months, was the Tiger Woods two-parter.
On Sky?
Yeah.
That was very, very good. And that was Access again, like Rachel Uchitelj, the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, Access, but not him. And
yes. You didn't need him, though.
I didn't. And I wonder about that because, you have your Wayne Rooney doc, you have your Arsene Wenger doc, even the Ronaldo doc. In some of these cases, would these films be better without these people? Because the great thing about the Tiger Woods one is everyone, the filmmaker, essentially is not compromised, which I think people often are, by the fact that you're essentially in a partnership with the iconic person that you're telling the story
And maybe
of.
in the Michael Jordan case, people might have felt it went a bit too far and that Michael was running the shop.
Yeah, I mean, that's really hard to know, isn't it? Like, and I know some of the players themselves were upset.
I suppose the danger with the person not being involved is they don't get the right to reply. Now, maybe they do get the opportunity to do it, but I'm not so sure Tiger Woods was that happy with that documentary. But sometimes if you have a life that's not perfect, nobody's life is perfect, you are going to be a little unhappy if...
Of course, and people always want to kind of have a sort of a sanitized, pure version of who they are when they're a massive, iconic figure like that. But I was thinking about it, I think it's almost the difference between the autobiography or the authorised biography and...
The biography.
The biography.
So like Phil Mickelson's, as we spoke about Malachy in the last hour, yeah. Alan Shipnuck, or there was one about Tiger a few years ago. So yeah, it is. There's two different sides to it, isn't there? And you get something from one, you get the real personal story, and then you get the third person. You get the anecdotes from people that might not be in a good relationship with the person anymore, the subject. So that is fascinating, absolutely. 30 for 30, I thought was a groundbreaking series that ESPN did, and there's so many great documentaries that came out of that. There was Once Brothers about the basketball players. There was the two Escobars about Pablo Escobar and Andres Escobar.
The band that was
yes.
Remember about the band the band that kept playing, or I can't remember the title.
I think the move was the Baltimore to Indianapolis.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
It was
the
phenomenal.
American football team.
9.79 the 100 meters.
The dirtiest race in history.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Hillsborough, once again, if you talk about tough subjects, but how well it was done, and they kept on going through the whole of not only the tragedy but the post. Situation with Hillsborough and the search for justice. There was one about Terry Fox, the man who died of cancer, and
right,
who was running, or not running, but walking across Canada into the wind. So many of them.
There are so many, and actually, Daniel Gordon, who did 9.79, also did Hillsborough.
Yes.
And if you want to watch a good film, just look at what he's done because he's brilliant, and he's done so many.
I think he did the Ronaldo one recently. Ronaldo Nazario. Was not him.
Was Anthony? What's his second name? Anyway, he also did the Being AP doc, which I thought was great.
Yeah, Tony McCoy. Yeah.
Anthony Wonka did AP McCoy and Ronaldo. He's really, really great filmmaker as well, with lots of good films. There's so many, and I think ESPN maybe and the 30 for 30, and that idea has probably been what's led to the proliferation, because what you're seeing now with a lot of sports people is they're saying, there's other people out there that have had documentaries made about them. Why not me?
Right.
Whereas I think up to 30 for 30, it was very much a closed shop and a closed door. And
very few, you'd have to think.
Yeah.
It was maybe Senna.
Senna's even since 30 for 30. I mean, it's the risk. It's the risk reward, I think, for an iconic sports person is, the risk is, I'm allowing someone into my life, and I may not like everything that comes out of this. But the reward is I may reach so many more people. There may be a financial reward in them becoming even more famous. Like you can see what's happened to Formula 1. Like Formula 1 has absolutely taken off on a whole other level.
It's brought a completely new audience into the sport. In a way, it's revived the sport. And it's a game changer for the sport.
But can you imagine, like 10 years ago, going to the tennis tour or the golf tour or the Six Nations and saying, this is what we're going to do. All access documentary. We have editorial control, not you. Or this is what we're going to do. People would laugh you out of the room and say, well, why would we ever do that? And then now that Formula 1 have done it, it's almost like sports. I can't speak for them. I don't know the negotiations that happen, but like we have a tennis one, we have a golf one. There's talk of a Six Nations one from what I can see in the papers and so on. So like clearly a switch has flipped, and these global broadcasters like Netflix and Prime and stuff like that can bring stories to a global audience.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out that it's important that the truth is told within these stories if there's not too much control in it. I'm fascinated, given you talked about saviours at the very start of this, where your career started, Ross. Who would be the Irish sports star you'd love to do a documentary on that you haven't, for example? Who's the most compelling potential subject for you?
I think the one that everyone wants to do would be Roy Keane.
Okay.
Isn't it? You know, I mean, but it's funny, you know, there has been a lot of Irish sports docs, and I'm certainly not the only one that's been making them. There's plenty of people making them. We have a Kevin Moran one coming soon. There's a Liam Brady one coming soon. I mean, Liam Brady's, I think that's a fascinating story. So there's tons of stories, but you could still name plenty of people that you'd still love to make a documentary about. Like there's Brian O'Driscoll, there's Roy Keane, there's Paul McGrath. You know, pretty soon when Leona Maguire wins the Open next year or whatever it might be, there's going to be a Leona Maguire documentary. The women's soccer team are doing amazing things. Like there's loads of Irish sports documentaries.
What would it be about Roy that you'd like to get the kernel of, I suppose?
He's so interesting, isn't he? I mean, I think it's really...
His books have been done. Roddy Doyle did a book, and he's on Sky all the time. And
it's just the material, isn't it? Like to be able to ask him really specifically, you know, on camera about things that happened in his career. Like, I mean, incredible performances, you know, but then we have all sorts of relationship breakdowns within United, within Ireland. I mean, maybe it's all been told, but people would still want to watch it. Yes. I would still want to make it, you know, and he's just, you know, he's never unfascinating, if that makes sense. You know, it's just, he's electric on camera, and it's such a funny thing because, you know, when he was a player, we all probably thought of him as a kind of like a shy man and so on. But he is electric on camera. And
maybe the first time he was with Tommy Gorman, potentially, you know. That's maybe the first time he was. Laker Gale, by the way, have done a great service, haven't they, for the country with all those stories they've told for the GA.
I mean, these are great archives as well, you know. But even during the Charlton era, there was 2 or 3 docs made at the time, you know. So like there's all these great archives. I mean, I don't know where they're all kept, but like, I mean, for sure TG Carr have done lots of amazing stuff and they'd have all that stuff banked. But yeah, it is, and it just, look, we love to watch them, so you know, they'll keep getting made, I suppose.
So what are we to look forward to? Tackling the All Blacks over Christmas, RTTV, and the story of that amazing win in New Zealand. Yeah,
I mean, it's December 29th. I don't know, you know, the RTE Awards are on this weekend, or probably tonight as we speak, and you know, we've got the Irish women's team and the Irish rugby team. I mean, how can you sort of choose between the team of the year there? But like the achievements that the Irish rugby team have, you know, achieved in New Zealand is off the charts. Like no one has done that in 28 years. You know, a professional team have never won a series in New Zealand. New Zealand, I know Ireland are number 1 in the world, but New Zealand won. You still won the you know, the Southern Series there with the other Southern Hemisphere teams. Like 3 countries before Ireland have done it. Like none of the home nations. Like that's an unbelievable achievement, you know. And I'm delighted that they kind of agreed to let us tell that story.
Ross Whitaker, continued success. You're doing a great service. Thank you for your time. Happy Christmas to you and yours.
Same to you.
We look forward to chatting to you soon. And best of luck with the latest documentary, Tackling the All Blacks.
Yeah, cheers, John. December 29th. Thank you.
Good man. Get the final plug in there. We're back with Football Saturday, previewing the World Cup final.